Going live. 1, 3, 1, 5, 6. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Leading with Light. Another series as I speak to my leaders, my faith-driven leaders. I am making sure that I am able to see everyone this morning. So that's where I am. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining as you're coming in. Thank you, Franklin. I see you. Simone, thank you for always being there for the leaders who listen on YouTube and for those who will listen to the replay. Today, I want to welcome you. And I want to say good morning. Thank God that I'm alive. Good morning, Dr. Leslie. And I want to say today is the second day in the last month of the year. And so we are doing some reset, we are doing some mandate, but this is the final session in this 3-part series that talks about the recovery, and that is dedicated to the executive leads, faith-driven leaders in Jamaica who have to be maneuvering the recent crisis. So I want to thank you for joining. So we are here to continue this last session on navigating emotional leadership in a crisis. And as you know, last week we focused on the shock, the initial shock, how you were to stay calm, how you were to remain focused, and how you were to actually communicate with presence. And so we talked about, today we want to move into what I'm calling the recovery phrase. Because, of course, we looked at it last week and we said the crisis didn't just test your systems, it tested your soul, it tested your team's emotional capacity. And so the resilience mandate is where I'm going to take you today with 3 actions that you must take to ensure this recovery. Good afternoon, Mr. Joseph. Thanks for joining. Every week we have new people. We appreciate you. I appreciate you for taking the time. Now, there are persons who request PowerPoint so that they are able to reflect after. There are notes that are also on my YouTube channel underneath each video. So you can move if you desire to go further, if you want to continue this conversation privately, and if you just want to connect with me so you can become a part of my group. All right. I remember that last week we spoke about what we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. And I'm repeating that because it is a challenge for many persons under the principle of vulnerability, and just making that reset for yourself as an executive leader when there is a crisis in your organization, in your community, because you're a part of your community, and personally for you in your home. So again, we looked at the fact that the pressure to maintain a perfect image, meet expectations, and achieve success can exacerbate symptoms of helplessness and feeling helpless. And that is what is happening to many leaders. The leader that leads a country, the community leaders, the members of that have to be pulled here and there, and who are expected to remain strong. The leaders the leaders also in schools and of churches who have to bear the blunt and pull up the socks to support others. This is really for you. The business people who have had to, the hotels that have had to close, really close, because they have to do their repairs, their damage. They have to displace the members of their team, the core members of their team. That is creating a ripple effect. All of those things are what we're looking at. And then we are looking at the crisis internationally, where persons have to be making adjustments, where persons have been laid off, where persons have suffered great loss, where persons are living in fear, whatever it is, you have to look at that. So today I want to highlight the recovery and healing phase organizationally and collectively. And I also want to talk about the 3 non-negotiable strategic actions or acts of emotional recovery that must be led from the top. I'm sorry. Yes, Joseph, I see you. You're joining from Lagos, Nigeria. We totally appreciate you. We hope you can hear us. And some of them have shut down, most of them, especially in the Montego Bay region, Dr. Leslie. And some are actually looking at the repairs that they have to do, and they're looking that it will take them more than 8 months. So they were forced to displace their workers. And some too have decided to throw in the towel. The crisis in itself was too much. So we are talking about resiliency as a journey and not a sprint. It's a marathon. To bounce back is going to be a marathon in these areas. And so I speak to my leaders today, my faith-driven leaders, and I want to talk about the resilience mandate. You see, the first mistake as leaders we make after a crisis is rushing the return to normalcy. Thank you for joining. I see you. I don't want to mispronounce your name, but I see you, Miss.
I am an AI assistant, not a person with a name to mispronounce.
I see you, Miss. Oh my. I got a inflict there when I try to get on your name. So I see you. Mary, I see you. Simone, I said that already. Yes, I see you, Franklin. I see you, Dita. I see you. And I see you, Lincoln. I see you. That's where you are. All right. So I'm saying that we rush the return to normalcy because we hate the instability and we want to pretend that things are okay and that we don't have any wounds. But this is a failure of governance. I say that over and over. The strategic leader knows that you must conduct an audit of the wound before you lead the repair. And so the resilience model is not about bouncing back quickly. It's about leading a disciplined, compassionate recovery that ensures you emerge stronger, more integrated, and you're rooted in a deep sense of strategic certainty. All right, so that is where we are. The thing about the principle is that the first action that we must take is that strategic pause. We must take that pause. That strategic pause that refuses the rush. And there are 3 tenets of strategic actions of recovery that I want to implement, I want to integrate right here, and the principle of the recovery. And so for the executive leader, the business leader, those in the hotels and so on, the first thing that you must do is what we call the strategic pause. And you must understand that the principle of this pause is that you must be able to audit your system. You have to do the system audit before you do the system reset. You have to be realistic. You have to accept what has changed. You have to now sit down in that pause and look at how you are going to refocus. What was not working, you want to eliminate that in the recess. As you look at the audit, you want to take what it is that is there. So you want to take a physical audit, you want to take an emotional audit, you want to take a skills audit, you want to also look at your resource audit. What is it that is available? What is it that you have in your hand that can assist you with the reset and the readjustment? You want to look at the state of your mind, and you also want to look at the state of your emotions. And for you to do that, you have to implement a no-fault emotional debrief. And then you want to focus on what the crisis revealed about your capacity and about your values. And so that focus is a question you must ask yourself as you embark on your fault emotion debrief, your no fault emotional debrief. And so you want to ask, what did the crisis reveal about my capacity, our capacity as an organization, as a school, as a church, as a community, and the values, even as a country? And what are the values that we are hearing out there? What are the values that are being revealed? And this is very important because the faith-driven insight that is given to a faith-driven leader is that every crisis is a revelation. So we want to do that audit so that the reset, the realignment, and the restart is sustained. And we want to understand that every crisis is a revelation. It reveals what our systems rely on. And it shows up, and I know you love this, Dr. Leslie, it shows up as faith or fear. And I talk about, in a recent post, I spoke about the issue of harvesting your faith. You can't harvest faith until there is a challenge, a struggle, or a crisis. That is when you have to pull on your faith. But fear in itself shows up continuously if we do not plant faith and keep harvesting it. So in a crisis is really the point where you begin to harvest your faith. So the no fault emotional debrief isn't about blame. That's not what it is about. And we covered that the last time in the last session. It's really about creating that safe space to share the emotional toll that everybody is experiencing. And you want to ask your team, what did you learn about your own stress capacity? That's a very important question that you want to ask. What did this crisis reveal? You want to ask that also. And you want to look at the cracks in your culture, your formal and your informal culture, because there are two cultures that are structures that run any organization, even the home, the formal and the informal structure. So you want to ask, what are the cracks that are now being revealed? Know that you're naked and unashamed. You want to look at this. So what am I saying? You must use this pause to anchor to your core values and that of your team, to revisit your mission and to ratify the foundations of your compelling vision. You want to now look at creating your proven strategy, and you want to make sure that there is internal alignment. And when I talk about internal alignment, I want to talk about the core of the organization, and I also want to talk about the internal alignment that bridges the gap between your calling, your career, your values, and your expectations. And also your outcomes, your profit and loss. Because profit and loss is not just money. It's resources, human resources also. It's human capacity. We want to understand all of that. So what was the capacity violated? Because these answers guide you to rebuild your strategy. That's number one. Let's look at number two. Are you going to be carrying faith, or are you going to be carrying fear? Because number two is communicating with a clear vision. Communicating with a clear vision. So communication after a crisis, Daniel Coleman says, is 80% emotional management and 20% facts. Very important. I looked at that and I laughed at it but I saw the reality. He says communication of our crisis, Daniel Coleman, is 80% emotional management and 20% facts. And so you have to lead with a very clear vision. You have to know what it is about. So the principle has to be that it will be clarity going forward and consistently rebuilding trust by honestly saying what you know, honestly anchoring what you know is in your power to do, and actually calling on the wherewithal, the creativity, the innovation of your team as they themselves grapple with getting the clarity and the confidence to go back to living a normal life, not back to where they were before, not the past. And so the collective trauma that persons have gone through by virtue of the fact that they were in the same country and so on, those things must be sifted out gradually and make persons understand where they are. Persons, you have to wait on persons until they're ready to grapple and to confront and navigate the fear that they're feeling. And how we graft faith is also important for in relation to clarity and confidence and building back trust, because we understand that the action must be that we do what we call a tactical pause. So the first one was really moving into the strategic pause, and now we are going to be looking at what we call a tactical pause. So the strategic pause talks about not rushing, taking the time to understand the crisis, although we hate the instability and we really want to pretend that life goes on as usual. And we also want to use the strength mandate that we have, that we must remain strong, we will, and we can recover at a prescribed time. We want to give persons time to heal and to audit their own wounds and to look at the principle of how they're gonna be making sure that their audit reveal their cracks, their capacity, their strengths. And that's why we want to ask them those important questions, and they must ask themselves those important questions also. And then we want to communicate with that clear vision where we build the clarity and the consistency through conversations, through understanding. And so we are with the action that we must take here is the practical pause. And then the focus really is on using empathy with a strategy to listen for the emotions, what is said and what is not said, and really offer the strategic solution. And this strategic solution includes referral. It can include physical support. It can include care, physical care, but it must also include the emotional care and the spiritual foundation of pulling back your members and yourself to reconnect with your voice, your purpose, and your ambition. And so the tactical pause, that's why it is called the tactical pause, is a very critical tool. So before you respond to an email, that's what we are talking about. Before you respond to your email and before you really look at answering the cry or a team's question or a public inquiry, you must actually take that pause and you're asking yourself, what does this situation need from me? Does it need stability or solution? After a crisis, it's usually stability that is needed. So we want to focus on that. The faith-driven leader knows that to reset and to realign and to restart is not easy. So you want to look at your systems. What is it relying on? Faith or fear? Because that's what it really boils down to in the end. The fluff and the cobwebs, when they are pulled away and you get to the spider and decide to kill the spider, you realize that you're either functioning on faith or fear, and your team is either functioning on faith and fear. And so you want to look at the systems, because it's not only the systems that fail, it's the belief, it's the hope, it's the uncertainty that drives either the faith or the fear, and it mostly drives fear. And so you want to make sure that you look at where your boundaries are weakest, and you want to use the pause, this tactical pause, to anchor to yourself your core values. And you want to look at the transparency and look if it was compromised. Are persons locked into themselves? Are persons isolating? Are they alienating? Because you want to bring them back. Because alienation and isolation is a sign that they are actually feel overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, ashamed. There is a survival remorse. All of those things have to be targeted. And as I said, the answers will guide where you're going. And so we want to look at that tactical pause, and we want to talk about how it really pans out as a tactical pause, because it involves your team and it involves you being calm. And the faith-driven insight that this faith-driven leader understands is that your faith anchors you. And so you have to make sure that you do a tactical pause for yourself also. You look at where you are. You look at what has changed. You look at who you have now become through the crisis. You evaluate if your core values have changed. And that transition that you're going through is also the transition that your team goes through. And as they move through that transition, you want to make sure that you remain calm, because calmness is contagious. So once you have gotten back your bearings, once you have understood the revelation that nothing just happens, that God still has things in control, and that He will work it for your good, and that you need to focus on hearing His voice and what He's saying and the steps that He says you must take organizationally, personally, and collectively. And you want to listen and you want to communicate that to your team through your calmness. So you want to lead a sense of self-control and purpose, because you want to teach them to trust in the ultimate governance that is spiritual as much as physical. You want to understand that recovery and healing cannot be done in isolation. So you'll heal personally through the support, the faith conversations, the mentors, and the certified coach, because a crisis or a trauma requires that type of referral, or a guidance counselor, or a pastor who is equipped to carry you the next leg in your personal sphere. And then there is also the issue of how you bring back your team. As a leader, executive and otherwise, you may not have the composite experience to pull them from the complex and differing emotions, loss, and responses to the trauma. So you want to, as we say, take that tactical pause so that you can understand what is to be done and do all of those things in a structured, disciplined way, so that it is sustained and persons get the help and the solutions that they need. And so it pulls them back to trust in the ultimate governance. And it provides the stability, even when the boundaries or the landscape. And persons, when they get that, they begin to regroup themselves, regroup their hands, and press along in many ways. And so we want to understand that that is very important. The third act is re-anchoring the asset. And the asset is really you. And it's also your team. So we focus on people and not profits. We want to pull back the capacity, because persons can't really survive or lead from empty. They can't lead from an empty cup. You can't fill anybody or pour into anybody if you are empty. And after trauma, everybody is empty in some way. Everybody grapples with helplessness or loss. Some become more anxious than others, and some it leads into depression, depending on what we say is the level of fear or faith, and if they're harvesting their faith or they're nourishing their fear. And so the principle of the re-anchoring of the asset is that there must be capacity protection, which is after a crisis. And in fact, for a faith-driven leader, capacity protection is post-crisis fiduciary duty. It is your duty to really protect your asset, which is you, and protect your assets, your companies and organizational assets, which is really people. And you do that you focus on investing resources in building your team resilience and not just the targets, how you bounce back and how you get back to making a great deal of profits and so on. Because as we said before last week, persons can come back physically, but they are very distant emotionally. And so it cuts down productivity. There is procrastination, there is anxiety, there is depression, and high functioning depression is something that we must not ignore after a crisis, where people function not inside, they are draining, they are leaking, they don't have the wherewithal, the motivation is not there, the confidence is not there. And we want to focus on understanding that before we can even build back any system, or before we can even talk about targets that have not been met, or evaluations that will now have to be put in place, or talk about a delegation or a layoff. Because persons have to find back themselves, reconnect to their ambition, their motivation, their purpose, their role, and their responsibilities while they grapple with loss, personal loss, or personal helplessness, or survival's remorse, or all of those things. So we want to now pay attention to high functioning depression. And I want to make that very clear, because the most neglected act after a crisis is the sustained stewardship. We tend to refuse to accept that we are really affected, we are burnt out, because we are pulled in so many directions, and we have become all things to all men. And so even when others see that we are struggling because of the stigma of showing up as a leader, being vulnerable, it's very important that we understand that in a crisis, especially a physical one, where a leader has lost as much or more than those who they lead, it's something that has to, a lot of regrouping has to be done also for that leader to sustain the damage. Because not only the physical structure that has been damaged, it's your asset. Your asset is your body, your emotions, or your mind. That also sustain damage. And so you must now formalize a structured program, a disciplined routine to manage your stress and build your resilience as well as that of your team. Because the powers that be really expect you to lead the charge in that regard. And so they tend to overlook that they really must be supporting you as the tiers go up. And that's why I'm talking about the top tier. What must begin from the top tier? And so we want to formalize emotional debriefing as part of our operational recovery. And so we want to set up those resources or group discussions for checking in on your mental health. You want to hire coaches to assist you, life coaches, those that deal with trauma and conflict, to assist you to overcome. You want to pull into those free offerings and communities that help you to practice the reality testing and checking in on your mental health, what is actually in your control and what is not. And then the faith-driven insight that you have as a leader is that you have to accept what is changing and what has changed. And you want to understand, because you know that the resilient leader is an aligned leader. The resilient leader is an aligned leader. So your faith is not just a source of comfort. It is a source of strength for you and for your team that allows you to remain calm and focused and supportive of your team, very aware, very present, and very strategic. So we are talking about, as we highlighted last week, the importance of practical resilience. The positive toxicity will not work after a crisis because life will not be going on as usual. And overcoming is not this finger. That's not the overcoming. It's a gradual journey. It's a marathon. It's a complex phase. It's a challenging time. It is a troublesome course as different people grapple with different things. And so you must protect your capacity. You must protect your peace. And I talk about the levels of prayer. In the last group session I had with leaders in that crisis that joined this session, we talked about the levels of prayer that you must have, the different levels. And so when you come to protecting your capacity, you are at the level 2. Of course, if you want to learn more, you can connect with me and I can give you that guidance. Why is it that you need to protect your capacity and your peace and that of your team? Is because really the world needs your clear vision. Your team needs your clear vision. Your family needs your clear vision. You need a clear vision because it safeguards the emotional reactivity. And that's different than the emotional acceptance of what is happening that allows you to grieve through either sighing or crying. And crying is really one of the strongest responses and carries so many benefits. Of screaming, of admitting that you need support, that you're struggling, that you're not doing well, that you're not having it all together. All of that are emotional responses that are held with a certain scrutiny. Reacting to the helplessness through severe depression, anxiety attacks, and so on requires much more. That in itself is systemic and requires certain expertise to help you to grapple successfully and navigate through this dark time. And so we want to make sure that we understand the difference. Thanks for joining, Lisa. I see you there. Thanks for joining, Sean. I also see you there. So it's very important that you protect your capacity. Of course, I'm speaking to the faith-driven leaders. We want to also understand that the key takeaways I want you to have is that leading an emotional recovery requires more than a tactical plan. Getting persons together, giving them their care packages and so on, giving them the physical support that you think they need. It's clear that it's much more than that. Much more than that. That is just the survival instincts chipping in. That is just starting on the fulfillment chain that is at the bottom where you meet those basic needs. But it also requires strategic emotional intelligence. And we talked about that in detail for the last 2 weeks. It requires you to be present. It requires you to be aware and anchored. And present, as we have already highlighted, means present in reconnecting to yourself, your purpose, your motivation, your core values, and leading your team to do the same, to become present in the situation, to accept the things that they cannot change, to look at the strategic steps that they will take forward, what they will leave behind because that's what they need to give up, what they are really surviving, how they are really surviving, and how they look at what they thought they couldn't do without, and know how are they grappling, how will they reframe their surroundings, their mindset, their concepts going forward. What is it that truly matters? What is it that should be recovered? And what is it about the healing What have you learned about your capacity, your resolve, and your resilience? And you want to look at how we can put that all together to create a proven strategy to navigate the recovery and the healing. And so that awareness comes from doing that audit through the tactical pause and the strategic pause. So we have already understood the difference. The strategic pause is not rushing, and the tactical pause is analysis and evaluation for realistic action and practical solutions. And so it also requires you to be anchored. And anchored means that you face the reality of your situation and you harvest your faith and you take steps to dismiss your fear. And we want to understand that. So you ask yourself, what is actually in my control right now and what is not? And that's simple. We're not going to complicate the process. If we want to dig deeper, of course, you can connect with me. You can book your session, your clarity session, and we go from there, because our reactions to our different circumstances, persons can go through the very same circumstances and react very differently depending on your experience, depending on your mindset, and depending on your internal preparation. How the affairs in your life, the actions, the situations, the activities, how those framed your disappointments, your joys and your sorrows, how they actually framed you and prepared you for greater challenge. And so because of that, person's responses are inbuilt to a large extent and are very, very different. Person's expectations are different, and person's responses and reactivity is very different, especially if you are operating from a place of faith. And so I am challenging you to ask yourself the question as you start that recovery. Welcome, Annie. What is the activity that is in your control right now and what is not? What are the real, honest, practical steps that I can take with using what is in my hand to move forward? So you want to look at these three acts: the pause, the clear communication, and the re-anchoring. And you want to implement them this week. Implementing them will not only restore your organization, but it will deepen your legacy as a leader. And it will also make persons understand that you're leading from an authentic place of strength, a strength that carries vulnerability, humanness, and also a heart. And so they will allow you to be yourself. They will give you the space to recover and also heal. And they will actually be accepting of what is in your power, what your limitations are, and more open to come together and use their creativity and innovation as they heal, as an engine for their survival and for their resilience building. So the resilience that is built, that mandate, is useful, and it is actually authentic also, because each person in that group, in that community of practice, in that mutual accountability, holds each other together, but still gives you time to move at your own pace. Good morning, Adinga. I think this is Adinga. Thanks for joining. And so that is where we are. We also want to understand that these acts allows each person to lead themselves. They have to decide their own pace in the broader aspect of the expectation, what is now the mission, how that mission has been revisited, what are the adjustments, the realistic adjustments and outcomes that are now being framed, and what is the accountability matrix going forward that would offer the support, the emotional support that individuals need to bounce back? And what are the safety mechanisms that are put in place that persons can express themselves, can break down, can survive the anxiety, can overcome the depression? Because the implementation stage is very important. That is the sustained resilience. That is the sustained stewardship that I want us to understand. That is the point that is important, the sustained stewardship, the strategic emotional intelligence mandate that we give to people that requires them to be present along with you, to be aware along with you, and to be anchored along with you. Very much so, any implementing, taking action is the key to opening our inner self and getting the joy that is required. And I look at the crisis that has happened, and it bothers me because of how my faith has been stabilized in the country that I'm from, in the family, in those persons, with my colleagues and all of those persons. I look at those systems that had built me to who I am and so on. And I am really looking at a title. I have something that I'm writing about the crisis as I experience it through the lens of my family members, through the lens of my colleagues, through the lens of my friends, and so on. And all we can say, based on all of what I'm hearing, the farmers who are struggling, the food crisis, and so on, is I want my peace back. And so I am actually writing through the eyes of those persons. I'm taking the information that they are giving me and I'm putting it together properly as one of those mechanisms that would be a resource for how we actually pull back in the nature of such a crisis. Very important, because the recovery phase takes a little time. As I said before, it is a journey. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And so I thank all of you who have contributed, who have listened. And I want you to remember that no team can heal beyond their leader's personal emotional capacity. So you need to identify the emotional strain. You need to have persons release their guilt, their fear, or the pressure, which isn't theirs and which isn't yours. And so if this conversation resonated with you, and you're ready to move from recovery to true resilience and access the frameworks that integrate faith and execute strategy, I invite you to join our community. It's over at Substack. It's called the Sovereign Core. And we meet sometimes and we talk about rebuilding. As I said in the last session, we talked about the different levels of prayer that the executive leader needs in the case of a crisis. I want to thank you also for your leadership and the importance of emotional intelligence and self-management. To those executive leaders that are grappling, that are standing strong, still standing, that are moving by grace and through the strength of God, I invite you to actually go further. You can subscribe to my YouTube, where I explore these from a biblical confidence point of view in my YouTube videos. And those are posted, reels are posted daily for strength and encouragement and for learning. And videos, this live video is still there also. You can always retrack all of those that have gone on before. And there are other videos on leadership that talks about certain aspects of leadership that you will need as a faith-driven female leader. All right. So we talk about, if you also want to deepen your emotional leadership and restore the clarity or strengthen your leadership well-being, you might want to book your stewardship, your executive stewardship clarity session. And this conversation really is designed to help leaders heal, realign, and lead from purpose again. You can also download your free guide from my LinkedIn page or Facebook page or even Instagram. The link is there. So you download your free guide. and you start there. I also want you to buy or gift a copy of My Faith Looks Up, which is an upgrade of your faith. It promotes your healing. It talks about how you move from doubt to unshakable faith. My Faith Looks Up. And how you maintain that faith throughout all seasons. I am promoting this book because that is what I have in my hand. That is what I want to use to help the farmers. And so as you purchase a copy or gift a copy, remember that you're actually supporting a farmer, a Jamaican farmer, and you're helping the hand that feeds us to regroup and to bounce back. It's going to take some time. They need their seeds. Some of them need to, as they fix their homes, that's what they survive from. They need to know how they're going to go, how they're going to feed themselves, their children, how they're going to maintain their families. I cannot help every single farmer. And the number of books that are sold is what's really important because of the cost of the books. And so we are starting with 1,000. We are going up to 2,500. 25% of the profits of that book will go to assist farmers. Now, as we look and we work out the mathematics of it, if 1,000 will help 10 farmers, and if 2,500 can go up to help 25 farmers. So you're not helping a great deal of farmers if you don't buy the book. So we want you to buy your gift a copy. Gifting more than one is great. Gifting more than one is great. Buying more than one is great. Just promoting it is great. Just sharing it in your network is great. Just encouraging somebody to help a Jamaican farmer is great. So I want to end by saying that you're not just a leader. You're a divine vessel with a sacred assignment. God doesn't want you to serve from empty. He wants you to serve from the overflow, which is really the capacity. Thank you for joining me today on another Self-Care Tuesday, talking to another fellow faith-driven leader. Have a blessed and purposeful Self-Care Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining, Annie. Thank you for joining, Sean, Adiga. And thank you so much for joining, Lisa, Dr. Leslie, and all those who will be looking at the replay on YouTube, on LinkedIn. Thank you, Joseph, all the way from Nigeria. Thank you so much, Simone, Franklin, and all the others that I may have missed. Have a great day and still keep Jamaica in your prayers. The recovery is not an overnight thing. It's going to be a gradual one. Serve how you feel and you want to give back. Thank you.